Welcome back, everyone. I am so excited to dive into another high-scoring session with you. Today, we are tackling a fundamental part of the TOEFL reading section, the Read an Academic Passage task. In this lesson, we are going to explore a fascinating era of history while mastering the art of finding main ideas, analyzing technical details, and making smart inferences. This isn't just about reading, it is about thinking like the test maker to spot those perfect answers. Whether you are aiming for a perfect 30 or just starting your journey, this strategy session is for you. Let's get focused and start our engine. If you find these tips helpful, make sure to subscribe to my TOEFL and continue learning with us. Let's keep building your confidence for the big day. The Renaissance and Artistic Innovation. This title tells us exactly what our academic journey is about. We are looking at a specific historical period and how it changed the world of art. The word Renaissance indicates the time frame, and artistic innovation tells us the main focus will be on new methods and creative breakthroughs. When you see innovation in a title, expect the passage to list specific inventions or techniques that changed the game. The Renaissance, a period of intense cultural and artistic activity in Europe from the 14th to the 17th century, marked a profound shift from the medieval to the modern world. This opening sentence sets the stage perfectly. It describes the Renaissance as a time of intense cultural and artistic activity. Most importantly, it tells us this era marked a profound shift toward the modern world. This indicates that the passage will compare new ways of doing things against older, medieval traditions. This shift is a major theme. This era witnessed a rebirth of interest in the classical art and literature of ancient Greece and Rome. Here we see the inspiration behind the movement. The instructor in me wants you to notice the word rebirth. It shows that artists weren't just making things up, they had a rebirth of interest in classical art from the past. This historical connection explains why the art looked the way it did. Artists and thinkers of the Renaissance placed a new emphasis on humanism, which celebrated individual human potential and experience. Now we get to the philosophy. The new emphasis on humanism is crucial. This idea celebrated individual human potential and experience. In TOEFL terms, this is a cause. The effect of this humanist thinking will be seen in the realistic way humans were painted. Always look for these intellectual foundations. This focus led to significant innovations in art, as painters and sculptors sought to portray the human form and the natural world with greater realism and emotional depth. This sentence links the philosophy to the action. Because of the focus on humans, we see significant innovations. The goal was to reach greater realism and emotional depth. Realism is a huge keyword here because it describes the physical appearance of the art we are about to discuss. One of the most significant technical advancements in Renaissance painting was the development of linear perspective. Moving into the second paragraph, we start seeing specific examples. The author identifies linear perspective as a significant technical advancement. This is a concrete detail that supports the main idea of innovations. Perspective is all about how we view space on a flat surface. This mathematical system allowed artists to create a convincing illusion of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. This defines the technique for us. It is a mathematical system used to create an illusion of three-dimensional space. Notice the contrast between three-dimensional space and two-dimensional surface. This tells us exactly what the innovation achieved: depth. Filippo Brunelleschi is credited with its early formulation, and artists like Masaccio and Leonardo da Vinci perfected its use, giving their works a sense of realism that was unprecedented. We get some famous names here like Leonardo da Vinci. They perfected its use to create a level of realism that was unprecedented. This word in brackets is a huge vocabulary signal. If something is unprecedented, it means it has never happened or been seen before. It emphasizes how groundbreaking these artists truly were. Another key innovation was the use of oil paint, which replaced the faster-drying tempera. Here is a second technical example. The use of oil paint is our key innovation. It replaced an older material called tempera. This comparison is a classic TOEFL detail. The test might ask you what changed when oil paint arrived. The slow-drying nature of oils allowed for richer colors, subtle gradations of light and shadow, a technique known as chiaroscuro. and a greater level of detail. This sentence explains the advantages. Because it was slow drying, artists could create richer colors and greater level of detail. This is a direct cause and effect relationship. The physical property of the paint led to a higher quality of artistic detail. The subjects of Renaissance art also expanded. Paragraph 3 shifts from techniques to content. The subjects of art expanded. This word, expanded, is a big transition signal. It means that artists weren't just painting the same old things anymore. They were looking for new topics. While religious themes remained dominant, artists increasingly depicted mythological scenes, historical events, and portraits of wealthy patrons. We see the diversity here. Even though religious themes remain dominant, we now see mythological scenes and portraits of wealthy patrons. This tells us that the focus of art was moving beyond just the church. This reflected the growing secularism and individualism of the period. This explains the why. The change in art reflected new social trends, secularism, and individualism. These terms are important because they connect back to the humanism mentioned in the very first paragraph. Artists like Michelangelo and Raphael were no longer seen as mere artisans, but were celebrated as creative geniuses, enjoying a social status far above that of their medieval predecessors. This highlights a change in social standing. Artists weren't mere artisans anymore. They were creative geniuses. They had a social status far above those who came before them in the Middle Ages. This is a significant cultural shift in how society viewed talent. This elevation of the artist's role was a direct result of the humanist belief in individual achievement and creativity, fundamentally changing the nature of art production and patronage. The final sentence wraps it all up. This elevation of the artist's role was a direct result of humanist belief. It changed art production and patronage. This shows how ideas, status, and art were all interconnected during the Renaissance. Let's jump into the first question. We are looking for the big picture here. This is a main idea question, which means we need to find the answer that covers the entire passage, not just one small detail. What is the main topic of the passage? The question asks for the main topic. This means we need an option that summarizes the whole text. We've talked about history, technical inventions like linear perspective and oil paint, and social changes like the elevation of the artist's role. A good test-taking tip for main idea questions is to look at the first and last sentences of each paragraph. They often act as a roadmap for the passage's overall direction. Let's take a closer look at option A, the life of the artist Leonardo da Vinci. This option claims the entire passage is about the life of Leonardo da Vinci. While he is mentioned in Leonardo da Vinci as someone who perfected perspective, the passage covers much more than just him. It talks about many artists and broad cultural shifts. Therefore, this option is too narrow. Incorrect. Next, we'll examine option B, the economic conditions of 14th century Europe. Option B focuses on economic conditions. Although it mentions wealthy patrons, the passage is about art and innovation, not about money, trade, or general economics. It misses the primary focus of the text. Incorrect. Now let's evaluate option C, the artistic innovations and cultural shifts of the Renaissance. This option hits the nail on the head. It mentions artistic innovations, which we saw in the discussion of linear perspective and oil paint. It also includes cultural shifts, which matches the profound shift and the change in social status described in paragraph 3. It covers every major point of the passage. Correct. Let's check option D and see how it fits. The differences between Renaissance and medieval art. Option D talks about differences between the two periods. While the passage marked a profound shift from the medieval world, the main focus is on what the Renaissance did and how it innovated, rather than just a side-by-side comparison of the two styles. Option C is a much more complete summary. Incorrect. The correct answer is C, because the key expressions in the text directly match this option, while the other choices either provide incomplete information or clearly contradict the passage. Moving on to the second question. This is a vocabulary question. We need to find the meaning of a specific word based on how it's used in the text. The word unprecedented in the passage is closest in meaning to. We are looking for the meaning of unprecedented. In unprecedented, the author is describing the realism achieved by artists like Leonardo da Vinci. Since these were technical advancements, we can guess the word refers to something new and superior to the past. A practical tip: replace the word in the sentence with your choice. If the sentence still makes sense and keeps its original meaning, you've likely found the right answer. Let's evaluate option A together. Unpopular. Option A suggests unpopular. However, the passage states these artists were celebrated as creative geniuses. It wouldn't make sense to say their realism was unpopular if they were being celebrated. Incorrect. Let's move on to option B, unrealistic. Option B says unrealistic. This is the opposite of what the text says. Paragraph 2 is all about creating a convincing illusion and realism. These innovations made art more realistic, not less. Incorrect. Next, we'll examine option C, never seen before. This is perfect. If something is never seen before, it is truly unprecedented. This fits the context of advancements and innovations. It emphasizes that this new realism was a brand new achievement in history. Correct. Let's break down option D, not very good. Option D, not very good, contradicts the tone of the whole passage. The author clearly admires these technical advancements. To call them not very good would go against the celebration of creative geniuses. Incorrect. The correct answer is C, because the key expressions in the text directly match this option, while the other choices either provide incomplete information or clearly contradict the passage. Now for the third question. This is an inference question. We need to find an idea that is not stated directly, but is clearly suggested by the information in the passage. What can be inferred about art during the Middle Ages? The question asks us to look for an inference about the Middle Ages. To solve this, look for the comparison points. The passage says the Renaissance was a profound shift from the medieval world. Specifically, it mentions greater realism, and that Renaissance artists had a status far above their medieval predecessors. If the Renaissance was greater, what does that say about the Middle Ages? Let's evaluate option A together. It likely featured a lower degree of realism than Renaissance art. This is a solid inference. The passage says the Renaissance painters sought to portray the human form with greater realism. If Renaissance art had greater realism, it logically follows that the art before it, in the Middle Ages, had a lower degree of realism. The text supports this contrast. Correct. Let's move on to option B. It was primarily focused on portraits of wealthy individuals. Option B is incorrect, because the passage says portraits of wealthy patrons was part of how subjects expanded during the Renaissance. This was a new trend, not a medieval one. Incorrect. Let's check option C. It was created using the technique of linear perspective. This choice is wrong because linear perspective is described as a technical advancement in Renaissance painting. This means it was not a standard tool during the Middle Ages. Incorrect. Here's option D. Let's break it down. Artists in the Middle Ages were highly celebrated as geniuses. This option contradicts the text. Sentence 4 in paragraph 3 says Renaissance artists were celebrated as creative geniuses and enjoyed a status far above that of their medieval predecessors. This implies that medieval artists were seen more as mere artisans, not celebrated geniuses. Incorrect. The correct choice should be marked as A, because the context of the passage supports only this option. The other choices involve surface-level reading or misinterpretation. On to the fourth question. This is a factual detail question. We just need to find the specific part of the text that mentions oil paint. According to the passage, what was an advantage of using oil paint? We are looking for an advantage of oil paint. Let's look back at the end of paragraph 2. It mentions that oils replaced tempera and then lists what they allowed for. Those allowed for items are your advantages. Scan for those specific benefits. Let's examine option A. It dried much more quickly than tempera paint. Option A says it dried much more quickly. This is actually the opposite of the truth. The passage calls tempera faster drying and notes the slow drying nature of oils. This is a classic TOEFL opposite trap. Incorrect. Let's move on to option B. It was less expensive to produce than other paints. Option B mentions it was less expensive. While this might be true in history, the passage never mentions the cost of paint. Remember, in TOEFL reading, if it's not in the text, it's not the answer. Incorrect. Now, let's evaluate option C. It allowed for the creation of richer colors and more detail. This is exactly what the text says. Sentence 5 in paragraph 2 says oils allowed for richer colors and a greater level of detail. This option matches the passage perfectly. Correct. Finally, let's check option D. It was primarily used for painting mythological scenes. Option D says it was primarily used for mythological scenes. While mythological scenes were mentioned as a new subject in paragraph 3, the text doesn't link them specifically or exclusively to oil paint. Incorrect. The correct answer to this question is C, since this option alone fully and clearly addresses what the question is asking, highlighting the importance of careful reading. Final question. This one asks about the rhetorical purpose or the organization of the passage. We need to see how the third paragraph fits into the bigger picture. How does paragraph 3 relate to the rest of the passage? The question asks for the relationship between paragraph 3 and the rest of the passage. Think about the structure. Paragraph 1 introduced the era and philosophy. Paragraph 2 talked about technical methods like linear perspective. Now, what did paragraph 3 do? It discussed subjects and the elevation of the artist's role. It's moving from how art was made to what was in the art and who made it. Let's examine option A. It describes the technical painting methods introduced earlier. Option A is incorrect because describing technical painting methods was the job of paragraph 2. Paragraph 3 focuses on content and social status instead. Incorrect. Next, we'll examine option B. It contradicts the idea that the Renaissance was an innovative period. Option B says it contradicts the idea of innovation. This is wrong. Paragraph 3 actually supports the idea of innovation by showing how artists became creative geniuses. It reinforces the era's importance. Incorrect. Now let's evaluate option C. It explains how the subject matter and status of artists changed. This is a perfect summary of the paragraph's role. It mentions subject matter, matching subjects, expanded. It also mentions status of artists, matching social status far above. It shows a different side of the Renaissance shift. Correct. Finally, let's check option D. It focuses on the decline of religious art during the period. Option D is too extreme. It mentions the decline of religious art. However, the passage explicitly says religious themes remained dominant. It didn't decline. Other subjects just grew alongside it. Incorrect. Here, the correct option is C, which shows that once we understand the main idea of the text, identifying the correct answer becomes much more straightforward.